Imagine standing at the very end of your life. You are looking back at the decades you spent on this earth, and you are asking yourself one simple question: what if? Right now, as you sit here, you think your greatest enemy is failure. You think the risk of trying and messing up is what you need to avoid. But science tells us a completely different, much more terrifying story. When people are on their deathbeds, they don't weep over the mistakes they made. They are consumed by the things they didn't do. They are haunted by the silence of unmade phone calls, the dust on unstated projects, and the masks they wore to please people who don't even matter anymore. According to the largest scientific studies on human regret, there are 4 specific, predictable traps that will quietly, systematically ruin your life while you think you are just playing it safe. And the scariest part, you are probably walking into one of them today. We don't have forever to fix this. The clock isn't just ticking, it's running out. If you want to change the ending of your story, you have to understand the traps right now. Most men are taught to build a life based on predictability. We mistake stability for strength, choosing the comfort of a safe routine today over the terrifying uncertainty of building true long-term freedom. From a man's perspective, this is a quiet sacrifice of purpose for survival. We settle for a job we tolerate because the risk of building a legacy feels too heavy to bear. Women look at this and see a man who has stopped growing. They don't just desire financial security. They crave the emotional security of a man who has the courage to pursue a clear, unshakable vision. When you choose temporary comfort, you are trading away your future authority. Every time you delay the hard work of building your physical, financial, or mental foundation, you aren't just playing it safe. You are actively digging a trap that will eventually rob you of your choices and leave you stranded in a life you never actually wanted. N, potential. They don't look for a man who wins every single time, but they deeply respect the raw courage of a man who is willing to step into the arena and risk failure for something he truly believes in. The greatest threat to a man's future isn't the disaster of a failed attempt, but the slow erosion of his spirit when he realizes he chose to be a spectator in his own life. When you refuse to pay the price of boldness today, you guarantee that you will pay the much heavier price of regret tomorrow. Character is forged in the moments when no one is watching. Yet so many men secretly believe they can take a shortcut without paying the price. We convince ourselves that a small compromise in our integrity, whether in business, relationships, or personal standards, is just a strategic move to get ahead faster. But this internal negotiation fractures a man's self-trust, because deep down, he knows he chose the easy wrong over the hard right, traded away his self-respect for temporary applause, and became a fraud in his own story. Women possess a powerful intuitive radar for a man's alignment between his words and his actions. They do not just measure a man by the height of his achievements, they measure him by the depth of his foundational integrity. When a man compromises his morals for a quick win, a woman loses her ability to trust his leadership, realizing that if he is willing to cut corners on himself, he will eventually cut corners on those he claims to protect. The psychological weight of a compromised conscience behaves exactly like a hidden tax on a man's ultimate trajectory. Every time you choose the shortcut over the standard, you are not outsmarting the system. You are quietly eroding your own capacity for genuine greatness. Society conditions men to believe that vulnerability is a liability, leading us to mistake emotional stoicism for true strength. We withhold our deepest feelings, our gratitude, and our devotion because we fear that exposing our hearts makes us weak or lose our competitive edge. This self-imposed isolation creates a profound internal deficit, leaving us surrounded by people but entirely unknown. trapped in a prison of unexpressed words that we mistakenly believe protects our dignity. Women crave the safety of emotional clarity and feel deeply alienated by a man's calculated silence. They do not just want a provider who fulfills a checklist of duties. They desire a partner who has the strength to speak his truth and bridge the emotional distance. When a man refuses to articulate his love and appreciation, a woman feels invisible, realizing that his silence isn't a shield against the world, but a barrier keeping her out. The silent erosion of our closest relationships represents the most tragic and permanent price of an unexpressed life. Every time you leave love unspoken out of pride or fear, you are not maintaining control. You are actively bankrupting the very bonds that give your achievements meaning. Men frequently camouflage their deepest fears under the sophisticated guise of waiting for the perfect moment. We tell ourselves that we aren't quitting. We are simply strategizing, analyzing, and waiting for the market to shift, the finances to align, or our confidence to mature before we commit to our ultimate goals. This psychological loop allows a man to preserve his ego by feeling productive while remaining entirely safe from the threat of failure. Effectively choosing the comfort of a perpetual planning phase over the messy reality of actual execution. Women can easily distinguish between a man who is genuinely preparing for a strategic launch and a man who is hiding behind an endless checklist of excuses. They do not look for an idealized partner who has every variable perfectly figured out before he acts. Rather, they deeply respect a man who possesses the internal fortitude to initiate action amidst chaos and uncertainty. When a man uses perfectionism as a shield, a woman perceives a fundamental lack of conviction, realizing that his grand ambitions are merely a performance designed to mask an underlying hesitation to test his true limits. The illusion of readiness functions as a highly deceptive trap that quietly consumes a man's prime years without ever yielding a single tangible result. Every single day spent waiting for conditions to become flawless is a day you actively choose to surrender your momentum to a future that will never arrive. When you require absolute certainty before you begin your journey, you are not exercising wisdom. You are merely choosing a slow, socially acceptable form of surrender that robs you of the very experiences required to build true strength. A man's psychology is naturally wired to focus on the immediate battle, causing us to mistakenly measure our worth by the daily accumulation of titles, trophies, and tasks. We become so utterly consumed by the pressure to win the current hour that we completely forget to ask if the hill we are climbing is even worth defending. This short-sightedness creates a devastating internal rift where a man can build an incredibly successful career on paper, yet wake up in midlife with a profound sense of emptiness because he realized he spent his entire existence building a resume instead of establishing a lasting legacy. Women possess an innate, long-term perspective that evaluates a man not just by what he accumulates today, but by the generational shadow he casts into tomorrow. They look past the immediate vanity of a man's status to see the deeper impact of his character, valuing how he treats people, how he stands for his values, and what kind of emotional and moral inheritance he is preparing for those who follow. When a man lives only for his own immediate validation, a woman senses a lack of enduring substance, recognizing that a life lived purely for the self leaves behind a vacuum rather than a blueprint for others to follow. The ultimate tragedy of the masculine journey is realizing too late that your legacy is not something that magically begins when your life ends. It is a story you are actively authoring with every single decision you make right now. Every time you prioritize temporary validation over your timeless values, you are handing the pen over to chance and allowing default circumstances to write your final chapter. If you want to change the ultimate impact of your existence, You must actively shift your perspective from what you can get from the world to what you can give to it, ensuring that your daily actions align perfectly with the grand vision you want to be remembered for.